In 1890, a prominent Boston lawyer named Samuel Warren was absolutely furious. The press had been intrusively covering his family's social activities, and intimate details of their private gatherings kept appearing in the Boston papers for everyone to read. But when Warren considered legal action for invasion of privacy, he discovered something shocking. While some scattered legal protections existed against specific intrusions, there was no comprehensive legal right to privacy in America, no unified concept that could address the new ways technology was violating personal boundaries. What Warren discovered that day would change how we think about human rights and personal autonomy. For most of human history, privacy as we understand it today wasn't just legally underdeveloped, it was practically difficult to achieve and culturally understood very differently. The idea that you could have a private life separate from your family, your community, or your social superiors would have seemed bizarre to someone living centuries ago. Privacy, as we understand it today, is one of humanity's more recent inventions, and its emergence in the late 1800s wasn't driven by noble philosophical ideals about human dignity. It was sparked by new technology, social anxiety, and a Harvard-trained lawyer's wounded pride. Today, we're going to trace how privacy went from underdeveloped to fundamental to endangered in just over a century, and why understanding this history might be the key to saving what's left of it. To understand how significant the development of modern privacy concepts was, we need to step into a world where it looked completely different. In medieval Europe, the very word privacy came from the Latin root privatus, which originally meant being deprived or separated from public life, often suggesting someone excluded from the important business of society. This wasn't just semantics. Medieval life was fundamentally communal. Peasants lived in one-room houses with their entire extended families, plus their animals. Privacy wasn't just difficult, it was often viewed with suspicion. The historian Philippe Ariès documented how medieval people understood individual identity differently than we do, with personal identity much more closely tied to group membership and social roles. When someone withdrew from the group, it was seen as either holy contemplation or potentially antisocial behavior. Even among the wealthy, privacy was rare. Medieval castles were built for defense, not intimacy. The Great Hall was where everyone ate, slept, and conducted business together. Private chambers existed, but they were primarily for storage or the most basic bodily functions. The idea of a private bedroom for personal reflection or solitude, unthinkable. Something began shifting in the 18th century, and it started with architecture. The rise of the bourgeoisie brought new building styles that reflected changing values. Houses began featuring hallways, those seemingly mundane corridors that allowed people to move through a home without passing through every room where others might be gathered. For the first time in human history, you could be alone in your own home without being conspicuous about it. This architectural revolution coincided with the rise of literacy and the novel. When people began reading alone, they experienced something unprecedented, private thoughts triggered by a private activity. The 18th century explosion in diary keeping and personal correspondence created the first widespread experience of an inner life that belonged to the individual alone. The American colonists inherited these emerging European ideas about private life, but they added a crucial political dimension. The British practice of general warrants, which allowed officials to search any home without specific cause, became one of the primary grievances that sparked the American Revolution. John Adams later wrote that it was precisely these violations of domestic privacy that kindled the American Revolution. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Fourth Amendment in 1791, they were protecting something that was still culturally novel, the idea that your home, your papers, and your personal effects belong to you alone, not to the king or the community. The Fourth Amendment only protected against government intrusion, though. The idea that private citizens or companies might violate your privacy wasn't even on their radar. For nearly a century, the Fourth Amendment seemed sufficient. Privacy violations were mostly physical, someone breaking into your home or reading your mail. The boundaries were clear and relatively easy to police. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with it, technologies that would shatter those simple boundaries forever. The first shock came in 1888 with the Kodak #1 camera. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could secretly document other people's lives. George Eastman's marketing slogan was, "You press the button, we do the rest." But what he was really selling was the power of surveillance. Suddenly, your private moments could be captured without your knowledge or consent and shared with the world. The social panic was immediate. Newspapers ran editorials warning about Kodak fiends who might photograph you without permission. The legal system had no framework for addressing this new threat. Photography wasn't trespassing, it wasn't theft, and it wasn't assault. The law simply had no category for this new kind of violation. This brings us back to Samuel Warren and his media troubles. Warren wasn't just any aggrieved citizen, he was a Harvard-trained lawyer and a member of Boston's social elite. When the newspapers violated what he felt was his family's right to privacy, he had the education, connections, and resources to do something about it. He partnered with his former law school classmate Louis Brandeis, who would later become a Supreme Court justice, to write what became the most influential law review article in American history. Their 1890 article, The Right to Privacy, appeared in the Harvard Law Review and changed everything. Warren and Brandeis argued that existing laws protecting physical property were inadequate for the modern world. They proposed something radical, a legal right to be let alone. They wrote, "The intensity and complexity of life attendant upon advancing civilization have rendered necessary some retreat from the world, and man, under the refining influence of culture, has become more sensitive to publicity." Their argument had a troubling foundation. They weren't defending privacy as a universal human right. They were defending the privacy of people like themselves, wealthy, educated, culturally refined individuals who deserved protection from the vulgar intrusions of mass media and the lower classes. Their concept of privacy was explicitly elitist. The legal system initially resisted. In 1902, a young woman named Abigail Robertson sued when a flower company used her photograph in advertisements without permission. The New York Court of Appeals rejected her claim, with the majority opinion dismissing Warren and Brandeis's clever article and declaring that no such right as privacy existed in law. The public outcry was so intense that the New York legislature passed the nation's first privacy law just 1 year later, in 1903. It prohibited using someone's name or likeness for commercial purposes without consent, with fines up to $1,000, roughly $30,000 in today's money. Early privacy laws weren't just about protecting individuals, they were about protecting existing power structures. Throughout the 19th century, courts refused to prosecute domestic violence cases, claiming that doing so would violate family privacy. In the infamous 1868 case, State v. Rhodes, a North Carolina court refused to prosecute a man for beating his wife, declaring, "We will not inflict upon society the greater evil of raising the curtain upon domestic privacy, to punish the lesser evil of trifling violence." Privacy became a legal shield that protected abusers and silenced victims. The 20th century brought wave after wave of new technologies that challenged privacy in ways Warren and Brandeis never could have imagined. Radio, television, computers, and eventually the internet each required society to renegotiate the boundaries between public and private life. Perhaps the most revealing moment came during World War II, when privacy was essentially suspended in the name of national security. The government monitored communications, tracked citizens' movements, and compiled detailed dossiers on millions of Americans. Notably, this generated little resistance. When survival was at stake, privacy suddenly seemed like a luxury society couldn't afford. This tension between privacy and security has defined the modern privacy debate. After September 11th, Americans again accepted massive surveillance programs in exchange for promised protection. The NSA's bulk data collection, revealed by Edward Snowden in 2013, showed how completely the balance had shifted. The government wasn't just monitoring suspected criminals, it was collecting data on everyone, just in case. Meanwhile, private companies were conducting their own privacy revolution. Google, Facebook, Amazon, and other tech giants built business models around harvesting personal data. They did something clever. They convinced users that this wasn't a violation of privacy, but a service. You weren't being surveilled, you were being personalized. Your data wasn't being stolen, it was being leveraged to improve your experience. The Cambridge Analytica scandal of 2018 shattered this comfortable fiction. When Facebook users discovered that their personal data had been harvested and used to manipulate elections, the public response was explosive. The outrage revealed something troubling. Most people had no idea how much of their privacy they had already surrendered. Today, we're living through what might be privacy's final crisis. Artificial intelligence can now infer incredibly intimate details about your life from seemingly innocent data. Your smartphone knows where you go, when you sleep, who you talk to, and what you buy. Smart home devices listen to your conversations. Facial recognition systems track your movements through public spaces. As privacy has become more technologically difficult to maintain, it has also become more psychologically necessary. Studies show that people who feel they have no privacy experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. Privacy isn't just about hiding bad behavior, it's about maintaining the psychological space necessary for authentic self-development. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, implemented in 2018, represents the most ambitious attempt yet to restore individual control over personal data, but it's fighting against economic and technological forces that have made privacy violations incredibly profitable and increasingly sophisticated. Some scholars argue we're witnessing the end of privacy as a meaningful concept. Others believe we're on the verge of a privacy renaissance as people become more aware of what they've lost and more determined to reclaim it. Privacy emerged barely 150 years ago, not because humans suddenly discovered an innate right, but because new social and technological conditions made it both possible and necessary. For most of human existence, the idea that you could have thoughts, experiences, or spaces that belong to you alone was not just impractical, it was barely conceivable. Now those same forces, technology, social change, economic pressure, are threatening to make privacy impossible again. We're not just losing a legal right or a social norm, we're potentially losing one of the key psychological foundations of modern individual identity. Perfect surveillance isn't just possible now, it's profitable. The companies tracking your every click and the governments monitoring your every message aren't doing it out of malice. They're doing it because the current system makes privacy violations incredibly lucrative and increasingly easy to justify. The choice ahead isn't whether we can return to some imagined golden age of privacy. That age lasted barely a century. The choice is whether we'll consciously decide what privacy means in a world where everything can be monitored, or whether we'll let that decision be made for us by whoever finds it most profitable to know everything about our lives.